December 4th, 1963, the Ambassador East Hotel. Vinnie Torino had been working hotel security for exactly 3 months when Robert Kennedy walked through those marble doors like he owned Chicago itself. What happened next lasted 30 seconds. Kennedy spotted Phyllis Giancana at the bar, walked over, said something that made her face go white, then slapped her hard enough that the sound echoed through the lobby like a gunshot. 3 witnesses, 2 FBI agents, 1 off-duty cop who thought he was just earning extra Christmas money. By morning, 4 people were dead. By New Year's, the Chicago outfit had declared war on the Justice Department. And for 30 years, Vinnie Torino kept his mouth shut about what he really saw that night. The briefcase Kennedy carried in, the way Phyllis smiled before the slap, the photograph someone slipped under Vinnie's door the next morning. The night America learned that some provocations are worth dying for. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The photograph showed Vinnie's face in perfect profile, 25 years old and stupid enough to believe he was invisible, standing 3 feet behind Phyllis Giancana when Kennedy's palm connected with her cheek, his hand already moving toward his service weapon before his brain caught up to what was happening. 30 years later, Vinnie still kept that photograph in his wallet, a reminder of the exact moment his life stopped being his own. Now, December 4th, 1993, he sat in his Lincoln Park office watching snow pile against bulletproof windows, while CNN droned about declassified files and government transparency. The coffee had gone cold hours ago. His granddaughter Sarah's campaign photos smiled at him from his desk, bright, ambitious, everything Chicago politics could corrupt if given half a chance. The phone rang at 11:47 p.m. Torino, Vincent. The voice sounded like gravel mixed with cigarettes and 30 years of federal secrets. Agent Kowalski, remember me? Vinnie's blood turned to ice water. Ray Kowalski had been one of the 2 FBI agents at the Ambassador East that night. Supposedly died of a heart attack in 1987. You're supposed to be dead, Ray. Working on it. Lung cancer. Maybe 6 weeks if I'm lucky. A wet cough echoed through the line. Which brings me to why I'm calling. That footage from the hotel? It's surfacing. The words hit Vinnie like a Louisville slugger to the chest. What footage? Don't play stupid, Vincent. We both know someone was filming that night. Kennedy didn't just happen to find Phyllis at that bar. She didn't just happen to be sitting alone. And you didn't just happen to be positioned perfectly to witness the whole goddamn thing. Vinnie's mouth went dry. Through his office window, Chicago glittered like broken glass, beautiful and dangerous. Somewhere out there, Sarah was probably still at campaign headquarters, working late, planning her run for state senate. She had no idea her grandfather's past was about to destroy her future. The slap was staged, Kowalski continued. Justice Department needed Giancana to make a move. Something public, something violent, something that would justify what came next. Sam never retaliated directly against Kennedy, because he was too smart. But he did something else, didn't he, Vincent? Something that made the whole operation worthwhile. Vinnie closed his eyes, but that only made the memories sharper. The 4 bodies they'd found scattered across Chicago that December morning. Mickey Torelli, Giancana's nephew, dead in his car outside Comiskey Park. Tony Accardo's driver, found floating in Lake Michigan. 2 more soldiers, executed and dumped in an alley behind Little Italy. But it wasn't random violence. It was surgical, calculated, the kind of killing that sent a message to everyone watching. Sam cleaned house that night, Vinnie said quietly. Eliminated the guys he suspected of talking to federal agents, and in the process, gave justice everything they needed to paint him as a madman, a threat to national security, the kind of threat that needed to be neutralized permanently. The implication hung between them like smoke. Sam Giancana, found dead in his basement in 1975, shot 7 times. Officially unsolved. Unofficially, everybody knew it was a hit. What nobody knew was who ordered it. The film shows everything, Vincent. Kennedy's briefcase, Phyllis reading her script before he arrived, the signal she gave when you moved into position. And it shows you pocketing something after Kennedy left. Vinnie's hand moved instinctively to his chest, where a safety deposit box key hung on a chain beneath his shirt. For 30 years, he'd kept Kennedy's insurance policy locked away, never understanding exactly what it insured against. Who has the footage now? That's the million-dollar question. Could be CIA, could be outfit remnants, could be some documentary filmmaker who thinks he's found the story of the century. Kowalski's breathing sounded labored. What I know is this: somebody's shopping it around, and when it surfaces, your face is going to be all over it. The cop who helped set up Sam Giancana. Through his window, Vinny watched a black sedan cruise slowly down his street. Too slow for the hour, too careful for the neighborhood. It paused under a streetlight, and for just a moment, he caught a glimpse of the driver's face. Young, professional, federal. "Ray, where are you calling from?" "Somewhere safe, for now." Another cough, this one wet with blood. "Listen carefully, Vincent. They're going to offer you a deal. Cooperation in exchange for your granddaughter's safety. Don't take it. Whatever they promise, whatever they threaten, don't take it. Because the moment you start talking, you become a liability they can't afford." The line went dead. Outside, the black sedan had disappeared, but Vinny knew they'd be back. They always came back. The only question was whether they'd come with handcuffs or bullets. He pulled out his cell phone and speed-dialed Sarah's number. It rang 4 times, then went to voicemail. Her voice, bright and confident. "You've reached Sarah Chen, candidate for Illinois State Senate. Leave a message and I'll get right back to you." The sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway outside his office. The footsteps paused outside Vinny's door. 3 deliberate knocks followed. Not the aggressive pounding of federal agents, but the careful rhythm of someone who understood the delicate nature of late-night conversations in Chicago. "It's open," Vinny called, his hand instinctively moving to the .38 in his desk drawer. The door swung inward, revealing Marcus Washington, 72 years old, and still carrying himself like the Marine sergeant he'd been in Korea. Marcus owned the building, had been Vinny's landlord for 15 years, and possessed the rare gift of appearing whenever trouble was brewing. "Saw the light under your door," Marcus said, closing the door behind him with the quiet precision of a man who'd learned to move carefully through dangerous places. "Figured you might want some company. Coffee smells like motor oil, by the way." Vinny managed a tired smile. "It's been a long night." Marcus settled into the worn leather chair across from Vinny's desk, his weathered hands folded in his lap. The old Marine had a way of taking up space without demanding it, of being present without intruding. It was a skill Vinny had never mastered, even after 30 years of trying to disappear into the background of other people's lives. "Sarah's campaign event went well tonight," Marcus offered. "Saw it on Channel 7. Smart girl, your granddaughter, got her grandmother's fire and your stubbornness." The mention of Maria sent a familiar ache through Vinny's chest. 5 years gone, and he still caught himself reaching for the phone to call her when the weight of old secrets became too heavy to carry alone. She'd been the only person who knew about the photograph in his wallet, though he'd never told her the whole truth about that December night in 1963. Some burdens were too dangerous to share, even with the people you loved most. "She's got good instincts," Vinny said, his eyes drifting to Sarah's campaign photo. 28 years old, first-generation American, daughter of immigrants, who'd built a small empire of restaurants across the South Side. Sarah had inherited her father's business sense and her grandfather's sense of justice, though she'd chosen law school over the police academy. Smart girl, indeed. Smart enough to stay clean in a dirty city. "You worried about something, Vincent?" The question hung in the air between them. Marcus had earned his right to ask it, had covered Vinny's back more than once during the lean years after Maria's death, when grief had made him careless and old enemies had started circling. The building's security system was military grade, installed at Marcus's expense after a break-in that had been anything but random. "Old business," Vinny said finally, "the kind that doesn't stay buried." Marcus nodded, understanding in the way that only other veterans of dirty wars could understand. He'd done 3 tours in Southeast Asia after Korea, working for people whose names never appeared in official records. They'd never discussed the details, but Vinny recognized the signs, the way Marcus's eyes never stopped moving, cataloging exits and threats. The careful distance he maintained from anything that might be considered a normal life. "Anything I should know about?" Before Vinny could answer, his cell phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. Check your email. Sarah. Using a code they'd established years ago, back when she was in law school and working on a case that had attracted the wrong kind of attention. The kind of attention that required family emergency protocols and predetermined signals. Vinny's laptop chimed softly as the email arrived. The subject line was blank, but the message was brief and terrifying. Grandpa, someone broke into my apartment tonight. Nothing taken, but they went through everything. I'm staying at a friend's place. Don't call my regular number. We'll contact you tomorrow. Love you. The words blurred for a moment as the full weight of Kowalski's warning settled into place. They weren't just threatening Vinny's past, they were threatening his future, everything that mattered to him in this world. Marcus leaned forward, reading something in Vinny's expression that didn't require explanation. How bad? 30-year-old bad, Vinny said, closing the laptop. The kind that destroys everything it touches. Through the bulletproof windows, Chicago stretched out in all directions, 10 million people going about their lives while old sins prepared to surface like bodies in the lake. Somewhere in those lights was Sarah, hiding from threats she couldn't understand because Vinny had never found the courage to explain them. The key around his neck felt heavier than usual, the metal warm against his chest. Whatever was in that safety deposit box, whatever insurance policy Robert Kennedy had left behind, it was apparently valuable enough to risk Sarah's safety to obtain, which meant it was valuable enough to kill for. The snow continued to fall, covering the city in deceptive purity, while shadows gathered in places that had been safe just hours before. The silence stretched between them like a tightrope, Marcus waiting with the infinite patience of a man who'd learned that some truths couldn't be hurried. Vinny stared at the blank email screen, Sarah's words burning behind his eyes. 30 years of careful distance, 30 years of believing he could keep the poison of that December night contained, and now it was spreading to the one person he'd sworn to protect. His phone rang. Not his cell, the landline, the secure line that only 3 people in the world had access to, and one of them was dead. Vinny's blood turned to ice as he recognized the implications. The landline was swept for bugs monthly, installed by Marcus's contacts in the intelligence community, routed through enough layers of misdirection to make NSA cryptographers weep. If someone was calling that number, they weren't just making contact, they were making a statement. Answer it, Marcus said quietly, his hand moving to the service weapon he still carried despite being officially retired from everything. Vinny lifted the receiver. Yeah. Vincent Torino. The voice was silk over broken glass, cultured and precise with just a hint of Boston Brahmin. We need to talk. Who is this? Someone who knows exactly what Robert Kennedy whispered in your ear before he walked out of the Ambassador East 30 years ago. Someone who knows what you've been carrying around your neck ever since. The key felt like molten lead against Vinny's chest. Through the window, he could see the black sedan had returned, parked now with a clear view of the building's entrance. A second car had joined it, this one positioned to cover the rear exit. Professional work, federal work. I'm listening. Your granddaughter is safe, for now. She's at her friend Jennifer Nakamura's apartment on the north side. The architectural student lives above the Korean barbecue place on Clark Street. Sarah trusts Jennifer because they've been friends since Northwestern, and Jennifer's apartment has good sight lines and multiple exits. Smart girl, you're Sarah. Gets that from you, I imagine. The casual display of knowledge hit Vinny like a physical blow. They didn't just know where Sarah was hiding, they knew her thought process, her relationships, her survival instincts. They'd been watching his family for God only knew how long. What do you want? What I've always wanted, Vincent. What this country needed 30 years ago and needs even more today. Justice. Accountability. The truth about how deep the corruption really goes. You're talking in riddles. Am I? Let me be more direct then. December 15th, 1963. 4 bodies scattered across Chicago, all connected to Sam Giancana, all eliminated because they knew too much about federal operations. The Bureau called it mob cleanup. The media called it business as usual. But you and I both know it was something else entirely. Vinny's mouth went dry. In all the years since that night, through all the investigations and inquiries and conspiracy theories, nobody had ever connected those 4 murders to the hotel incident. The timeline was wrong, the victims were low level, and the official cause of death in each case pointed to internal outfit politics rather than federal interference. But this voice, this precise, educated voice, was drawing connections that shouldn't exist. Those men weren't killed because they were talking to the FBI, the voice continued. They were killed because they stumbled onto something bigger, something that linked Sam Giancana to operations that went far beyond Chicago, far beyond the mob, into territories that would have destroyed everything if it had come to light. You're talking about the Kennedy assassination. I'm talking about the architecture of power, Vincent, the careful construction of plausible deniability. Your Attorney General needed Sam Giancana to appear unstable, violent, unpredictable. He needed justification for what was coming. But what he got was something much more valuable. He got proof that the outfit had tentacles reaching into places that could bring down governments. Marcus was watching Vinny's face, reading the conversation through micro-expressions and decades of shared experience. His weathered hand had moved closer to his weapon, and his eyes had taken on the flat, predatory focus of a man preparing for violence. The key around your neck opens more than just a safety deposit box, the voice said. It opens a door to the real story. The one that explains why Jack Kennedy died 6 days after his brother humiliated Phyllis Giancana in front of a room full of Chicago power brokers. The words hit Vinny like a sledgehammer to the chest. 6 days. December 9th to November 22nd. The timeline was wrong. Kennedy had been killed before the hotel incident, not after. But something in the caller's tone suggested the chronology wasn't as simple as Vinny had always believed. You've got your dates mixed up, Vinny said. Do I? Check your watch, Vincent. What's today's date? December 4th, 1993. 30 years to the day after. The realization struck him like lightning. Not 30 years after the hotel incident. 30 years after the call. The call that had sent him to the Ambassador East in the first place. The anonymous tip about federal agents planning something that would require police presence, someone who could serve as an unofficial witness to whatever was about to unfold. He'd been played from the very beginning. The phone slipped from Vinny's fingers, clattering against the desk before Marcus caught it mid-fall. The old Marine's reflexes hadn't dimmed with age, but even he couldn't catch the pieces of Vinny's understanding as they shattered and reformed into a pattern too terrible to accept. Vinny. Marcus's voice seemed to come from underwater. Talk to me. But Vinny couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything except stare at the calendar on his wall, where December 4th was circled in red ink. Sarah's birthday was in 3 days. He'd marked it weeks ago, planning to take her to dinner at Gibson's, the same place he'd taken Maria for their anniversary every year until cancer stole her away. 3 decades. 30 years of believing he'd stumbled into history by accident, that his presence at the Ambassador East had been coincidence wrapped in duty. 30 years of carrying the weight of what he'd witnessed, never understanding that his witnessing had been the entire point. They called me, he whispered. December 4th, 1963. Anonymous tip about federal agents planning something at the Ambassador East. Said they needed a Chicago PD presence. Someone discreet who could observe and report. Marcus set the phone gently in its cradle, his movements deliberate and careful. Who took the call? Dispatch put it through to me directly, said the caller, specifically requested Detective Torino. I figured it was because I knew the hotel, had worked security there before. Vinny's laugh came out cracked and bitter. Christ, Marcus. I was so fucking proud, thought I was being trusted with something important. The black sedans outside had multiplied. 4 now, positioned at strategic points around the block. Not an arrest squad. Those came with noise and drama and federal marshals kicking down doors. This was containment, isolation, the kind of operation that required patience and precision and the absolute certainty that the target had nowhere to run. They've been watching me for 30 years, Vinny said. Watching Sarah grow up. Watching me build this business, make friends, try to forget. All of it choreographed, all of it controlled. Marcus moved to the window, his trained eyes cataloging threats and calculating odds. Buildings secure. Multiple exits, reinforced stairwells, roof access. We can get you out. And go where? You think there's somewhere they haven't already planned for? Vinny pulled out his cell phone, stared at Sarah's number for a long moment, then deleted it from his contacts. If they were monitoring his calls, and of course they were, he wouldn't give them any more reasons to focus on her. They know where she's hiding, Marcus. They know her friend's address, her escape routes, probably her goddamn coffee order. The landline rang again. This time Marcus answered, his voice flat and professional. Washington. A pause. Marcus's expression darkened. "He can't come to the phone right now," Marcus said. "He's processing some difficult information." Another pause, longer this time. "No, I don't think that's going to work for us." Marcus's grip tightened on the receiver. "Because we're not interested in deals. We're not interested in cooperation, and we're sure as hell not interested in threats." The response came sharp enough that Vinny could hear the anger bleeding through the earpiece. Marcus smiled, the cold, predatory expression of a man who'd faced down worse things than anonymous phone calls. "You want to know what I think?" Marcus said. "I think you people have been playing games for 30 years, and now you're scared because the games are catching up with you. I think that film you're so worried about, it doesn't just show Vincent's face, it shows yours too." The line went dead. Marcus set the phone down and turned to face Vinny, his expression grim but determined. "Whoever that was, they're not as in control as they want us to believe. People in control don't make threats, they make demonstrations. Sarah is safer than we are right now. You think they'd risk touching a political candidate 3 weeks before announcement? In Chicago? With media attention and campaign volunteers and opposition research teams looking for any excuse to destroy her?" Marcus shook his head. "They need her clean, which means they need her unaware." Vinny wanted to believe it, but 30 years of paranoia and guilt had taught him that safety was always temporary, always conditional, always subject to revision by people who moved in shadows and spoke in euphemisms. The key around his neck felt like an anchor, dragging him down into depths he'd spent 3 decades trying to avoid. Whatever was in that safety deposit box, whatever insurance policy Robert Kennedy had left behind, it was the center of everything. The reason for the phone calls, the surveillance, the careful choreography of his entire adult life. Outside, snow continued to fall on a city that specialized in burying its secrets. But some secrets refused to stay buried, and some debts could never be fully paid. The hunt was just beginning. Declaration felt like the moment before an avalanche, heavy with potential energy and the certainty that everything was about to come crashing down. Vinny sat in his chair, staring at the phone as if it were a loaded weapon, while the weight of 3 decades pressed against his chest like a collapsed building. "We need to get to that safety deposit box," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus turned from the window, snow reflecting off his weathered features in the amber light. Tonight? With half the federal government parked outside? Especially with half the federal government parked outside. Vinny stood on unsteady legs, feeling every one of his 68 years. "Don't you see? They're not here to arrest us. They're here to babysit us. Keep us contained while they figure out how to clean up a mess that's been festering for 30 years. He moved to the wall safe behind his desk, fingers trembling as he worked the combination. Inside, nestled between insurance policies and emergency cash, was a manila envelope he hadn't opened in 5 years. Maria's last letter, written during those final lucid days when the morphine couldn't quite silence her need to speak truths she'd carried too long in silence. "She knew," Vinny said, pulling out the envelope with hands that shook like autumn leaves. Maria knew more than she ever let on. The letter was 3 pages of Maria's careful script, each word chosen with the precision of someone who understood that time was running out. Vinny had read it once, the day after her funeral, then locked it away because the truth it contained was too dangerous and too painful to acknowledge. Now, with federal agents positioned outside like pallbearers at his own wake, he spread the pages across his desk and began to read aloud. "My darling Vincent," he read, his voice catching on words that tasted like goodbye. "If you're reading this, then the phone calls have finally started, the ones we both knew would come eventually." Marcus moved closer, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm. "You think I never noticed the way you checked the locks twice every night? The way you insisted on driving Sarah to school yourself until she was old enough to object? The way you'd go quiet every December, staring at that photograph in your wallet like it contained all the sins of the world? Vinny's hands were shaking so badly now that the pages rustled like autumn leaves. Maria's words continued with the relentless precision of a coroner's report. I know about the hotel, Vincent. I know about Sam Giancana's wife and what happened to her after you left that night. I know because Anthony Scarpelli told me before they killed him. The name hit Vinny like a physical blow. Anthony Scarpelli, one of the 4 men found dead on December 15, 1963, a small-time numbers runner with no apparent connection to federal operations or high-level mob politics. Officially, he'd been shot to death in his car outside a diner on the south side, another casualty of outfit housecleaning. But Maria's letter painted a different picture. Anthony came to me 3 days after the hotel incident. The letter continued. Scared out of his mind, talking about things he'd overheard, about how Phyllis Giancana didn't just go home and nurse her bruised pride after your attorney general humiliated her. She went to her husband, yes, but not to demand revenge. She went to tell him what Robert Kennedy had whispered to her before he walked away. Marcus was reading over Vinny's shoulder now, his breathing shallow and quick. Outside, the snow had intensified, turning the surveillance vehicles into ghostly shapes barely visible through the white curtain falling over Chicago. Sam's wife was FBI, Vinny read, the words feeling like broken glass in his throat. Had been for 2 years, feeding information about outfit operations in exchange for immunity on a racketeering charge that would have sent her to federal prison for life. The hotel incident wasn't about disrespecting Sam Giancana. It was about burning his wife as an asset. The pages slipped from Vinny's fingers, scattering across the desk like evidence at a crime scene. Everything he'd believed about that night, every assumption that had shaped 3 decades of guilt and paranoia crumbled into dust. Robert Kennedy hadn't slapped Phyllis Giancana to provoke her husband. He'd done it to expose her as a federal informant, knowing that Sam would have no choice but to eliminate the threat she represented. The slap had been her death warrant, delivered with theatrical precision in front of witnesses who could testify to its public nature. And Vinny had been there to document it all. The Chicago Police Department's official observer, providing legitimacy to what amounted to a federal assassination disguised as domestic violence. Jesus Christ, Marcus whispered. They didn't just use you as a witness, they used you as an accessory. The phone rang again, but this time Vinny didn't hesitate. He grabbed the receiver with steady hands, his voice calm and deadly when he spoke. You killed her, didn't you? Phyllis Giancana. You made her husband do it, but you killed her. Yes, the cultured voice replied without hesitation. And now we're going to discuss the price of your silence. The word hung in the air between them like a death sentence, simple, unadorned, delivered with the casual confidence of a man confessing to stepping on an ant. Vinny felt something fundamental shift inside his chest, a tectonic realignment of everything he'd believed about justice, duty, and the thin blue line that had defined his entire career. 30 years, Vinny said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. 30 years you let me think I was complicit in mob violence when I was really witnessing federal murder. Complicit is such an ugly word, Vincent. You were serving your country. Phyllis Giancana was a liability that threatened operations spanning 3 continents. Her elimination was necessary. Marcus had gone rigid beside the desk, his Marine instincts recognizing the tone of a commanding officer justifying casualties. But this wasn't war. This was something colder, more calculated, dressed up in patriotic rhetoric to hide its essential brutality. She had children, Vinny said. 2 daughters, both under 10. Collateral damage is regrettable, but... Shut up. The words came out like gunshots, sharp enough to cut through 3 decades of carefully maintained composure. Just shut your goddamn mouth. The silence stretched across the phone line, pregnant with implications neither man wanted to acknowledge. Outside, the federal surveillance teams maintained their positions, patient as undertakers waiting for the funeral to begin. You're upset, the voice said finally, its cultured tones now carrying a note of condescension that made Vinny's teeth ache. That's understandable. The truth can be difficult to process, especially when it challenges our fundamental assumptions about... About what? About how you people turned me into an accessory to murder. Vinny's free hand found the key around his neck, squeezing until the metal edges bit into his palm. About how you've been watching my family for 3 decades, waiting for the right moment to collect on a debt I never knew I owed? Your granddaughter is quite remarkable, by the way. Harvard Law Review, Northwestern Political Science, internship with Senator Durbin's office. She has real potential for national service. It would be tragic if her grandfather's misguided sense of moral superiority interfered with her future. The threat was delivered with surgical precision, wrapped in admiration and concern, but sharp enough to draw blood. Vinny closed his eyes and saw Sarah at 8 years old, gap-toothed and fearless, demanding to know why Grandpa looked so sad every Christmas. He saw her at 15, fierce and idealistic, arguing with him about Vietnam over dinner while Maria smiled and let them fight. He saw her last week, ambitious and brilliant and utterly unaware that her entire life had been observed, catalogued and weaponized by people who spoke about collateral damage like meteorologists discussing the weather. Here's what's going to happen, the voice continued with the patient tone of a teacher explaining simple arithmetic. You're going to retrieve whatever Robert Kennedy left in that safety deposit box. You're going to turn it over to us, along with any copies or derivative materials you may have created. And then you're going to disappear, quietly, peacefully, with a comfortable pension and the satisfaction of knowing your granddaughter's career remains untainted by association with Chicago corruption. And if I refuse? Then Sarah Elizabeth Torino, age 26, resident of 1247 North State Parkway, Unit 4B, will find herself the subject of a very thorough investigation into her family's connections to organized crime. Amazing how quickly political careers can evaporate when the wrong photographs surface. Amazing how creative forensic accountants can be when they're motivated to find irregularities in campaign financing. The casual recitation of Sarah's address hit Vinny like a physical blow, but it was the man's tone that finally broke something inside him. The bored efficiency of a bureaucrat processing paperwork, reducing his granddaughter's life to leverage in a game that had been rigged from the beginning. You really think you've thought of everything, Vinny said, and for the first time since the conversation began, he smiled. You people always do. Plans within plans, contingencies for every possible scenario. That's your strength, isn't it? The ability to see 3 moves ahead, to anticipate every variable. Experience teaches caution, yes. It also teaches arrogance. Vinny's smile widened, feeling like a crack in a dam that had been holding back 30 years of accumulated pressure. You know what you missed? What your files and surveillance and careful analysis never accounted for? The silence on the other end suggested genuine curiosity rather than practiced patience. You missed the fact that I stopped being a cop the day I walked out of that hotel, Vinny said. You missed that everything I've built since then, my business, my reputation, my relationships, was constructed by someone who knew he'd been used. Someone who spent 30 years preparing for the moment when the check finally came due. The cultured voice had lost some of its confident precision. What exactly are you suggesting? I'm suggesting you don't know me nearly as well as you think you do. The silence that followed stretched like a wire under tension, humming with the potential for violence. When the voice finally returned, it carried a sharper edge, the cultured veneer beginning to crack under pressure. Vincent, I think you may be overestimating your position here. You're a retired police detective with a security consulting business and a granddaughter to protect. We represent institutional power that spans decades and reaches into every level of government. This isn't David and Goliath. This is an ant threatening a steamroller. Vinny walked to his desk drawer and pulled out a file folder he hadn't opened in 15 years. The tab read insurance in Maria's careful handwriting, the same methodical script that had documented 30 years of household expenses and birthday reminders and love notes tucked into his lunch. But this file contained something else entirely. Maria wasn't just a housewife, Vinny said, spreading photographs across his desk while Marcus watched in growing amazement. She was a bookkeeper for Morrison Construction. You remember Morrison? Big federal contracts in the 60s and 70s, Defense Department projects, embassy renovations, a few very interesting jobs that never appeared in any public records. The photographs showed Maria at various construction sites, hard hat perched on her dark hair, clipboard in hand as she supervised payroll and material deliveries. Innocent enough, except for the faces visible in the background. Faces that Marcus recognized from organized crime files and Vinny knew from federal surveillance photographs. Maria kept records, Vinny continued, his voice gaining strength with each word. Not just payroll and material costs. She documented every meeting, every handshake, every envelope that changed hands between Morrison executives and very interesting people. Outfit guys, sure, but also federal agents, defense contractors, men in expensive suits who spoke with accents that suggested Ivy League educations and government pensions. The voice on the phone had gone completely silent. My wife spent 30 years watching money flow between officially unconnected organizations, Vinny said. She saw the same faces at construction sites and federal buildings and restaurants where wise guys met with people who were supposed to be investigating them. And being a very thorough woman, she wrote it all down. Marcus was staring at the photographs with the expression of a man watching dominoes fall in patterns he'd never imagined. Jesus, Vinny. She documented a network. A network that included the people who orchestrated Phyllis Giancana's murder. Vinny picked up one photograph showing Maria standing beside a man in a federal windbreaker, both of them smiling at the camera like old friends. The man's face was 20 years younger, but unmistakably familiar. The same bone structure Vinny had glimpsed in surveillance photographs. The same cold eyes that had watched him leave the Ambassador East Hotel in 1963. You want to know what else Maria documented? The Christmas party circuit. Federal agents and organized crime figures and defense contractors, all attending the same holiday gatherings, their wives exchanging pleasantries, while their husbands discussed business that never appeared in any official reports. Very cozy, very collegial. Very much the sort of thing that might interest congressional oversight committees. The cultured voice finally returned, but its confidence had evaporated like morning frost. You're fishing, Vincent. Even if your wife kept records, they prove nothing beyond normal investigative contacts and social coincidences. Maybe, or maybe they prove that the same people who murdered Phyllis Giancana also facilitated construction contracts that built federal safe houses where other inconvenient witnesses disappeared. Maybe they prove that organized crime wasn't being investigated so much as managed, directed, used as a tool for operations that couldn't be traced back to official channels. Vinny walked to the window, watching snow fall on the surveillance vehicles that had maintained their positions for hours without rotation or relief. Professional watchers who'd learned patience from decades of practice, but also watchers who'd grown complacent from years of unchallenged authority. You killed 4 men in December 1963, Vinny said. Anthony Scarpelli, Vincent DeLuca, Michael Romano, and Thomas Castellano. Small-time operators who happened to be in the wrong place when Phyllis Giancana died. Men who might have seen too much or heard too much or simply existed as loose ends that needed trimming. Those deaths were unrelated mob violence. Those deaths were house cleaning. And Maria documented the aftermath. The construction jobs that employed their widows. The insurance settlements that kept their families quiet. The scholarship funds that sent their children to good schools in distant cities where they learned not to ask questions about their fathers. Marcus had moved to the second window, his trained eyes cataloging the tactical situation while his mind processed the implications of Maria's documentation. They're not just watching us, he said quietly. They're waiting for something. They're waiting for us to panic, Vinny replied, to run or hide or make the kind of mistakes that desperate people make when they realize they're outgunned. But for the first time in 30 years, Vinny didn't feel desperate. He felt something much more dangerous, prepared. Vinny set the phone down without hanging up, letting the open line carry everything that followed. He pulled the key from around his neck, the key he'd worn like a millstone for 30 years, and held it up to the light. This isn't for a safety deposit box, he said, loud enough for the phone to capture every word. It's for a storage unit, one that Maria rented in 1964 under her maiden name, paid for with cash from her Morrison construction salary, one that contains 30 years of documentation about a network that murdered American citizens on American soil. Marcus stepped closer, his expression shifting from confusion to understanding. The granddaughter they threatened is already gone. Vinny's voice carried the satisfaction of a chess player announcing checkmate. Sarah left for Geneva 3 days ago. Full scholarship to the International Court of Justice, studying under professors who have no love for American intelligence operations that cross international boundaries. Amazing how quickly these opportunities arise when the right files reach the right people in The Hague. The silence from the phone stretched like a held breath. When the cultured voice finally returned, it carried a tremor that hadn't been there before. You're bluffing. Call her apartment. Send your people to knock on her door. You'll find a nice family from Nigeria who signed a 6-month lease and have no idea who Sarah Torino is. Vinny walked to his desk and pulled out a manila envelope thick with airline receipts, immigration stamps, and university correspondence. My granddaughter is studying international law with prosecutors who specialize in war crimes and crimes against humanity. She's also writing her thesis on federal overreach in domestic law enforcement. Marcus was staring at him with something approaching awe. How long have you been planning this? Since the day I buried my wife and found her real insurance policy. Vinny spread the final contents of Maria's file across his desk. Not just photographs and construction records, but bank statements, telephone logs, and meeting schedules that connected federal agents to organized crime figures to defense contractors in a web of corruption spanning 3 decades. Maria wasn't just documenting construction projects, he continued, his voice growing stronger with each revelation. She was tracking money. Federal money that flowed through Morrison Construction to organize crime figures who performed services that couldn't appear on government ledgers. Assassination, intimidation, elimination of inconvenient witnesses. A privatized death squad funded by taxpayers and managed by people who swore oaths to protect the Constitution. The cultured voice had lost all pretense of control. You have no idea what you're interfering with. Operations that protect national security? Operations that murdered a mother of 2 because she wanted to save herself from a racketeering charge. Vinny's words cut through the justifications like a blade through silk. Operations that turned local police into accessories and then held their families hostage for 30 years to ensure silence. He picked up a photograph of Phyllis Giancana, not the crime scene photos he'd carried in his wallet, but a family portrait showing her with her daughters at a Christmas party. Young faces full of hope and trust, unaware that their mother had already been marked for death by men who spoke about patriotism while planning murder. You want to know your fatal flaw? Vinny asked, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man who had finally stopped running from the truth. You assumed that because you controlled the official narrative, you controlled all the narratives. You never considered that the victims might have allies, that the witnesses might have consciences, that 30 years of guilt might forge someone into something harder than you anticipated. Marcus moved to the window, his military bearing evident in every line of his posture. The surveillance teams are pulling back, he reported. Looks like they're repositioning for something. They're retreating, Vinny corrected, because their handler just realized he's been outmaneuvered by a retired cop and a dead bookkeeper who knew that documentation is more powerful than intimidation. The phone line crackled with static, but the cultured voice managed one final attempt at leverage. Even if you have records, even if you've hidden your granddaughter, you can't prove... I can prove everything. Vinny pulled out a cassette recorder that had been running since the conversation began, its mechanical wheels turning with the inexorable precision of justice finally served. Voice prints, threatening federal witnesses, conspiracy to commit murder, violations of constitutional rights under color of authority. Amazing what kind of evidence people provide when they think they're in control. The line went dead, but Vinny could hear vehicles starting outside, engines turning over in the cold as 30 years of surveillance finally collapsed under the weight of its own arrogance. Marcus was looking at him with something approaching reverence. How did you know they'd call? How did you know they'd incriminate themselves? Because men who've operated in shadows for 30 years can't resist explaining their cleverness when they think they've won. Vinny walked to Maria's photograph on his desk, touching the glass with fingers that no longer trembled. And because my wife taught me that the most dangerous thing you can do to powerful people is let them underestimate a woman who keeps very careful records. Vinny set the cassette recorder beside Maria's photograph and watched the last surveillance vehicle disappear around the corner. The snow had stopped falling, leaving the street clean and quiet in the way Chicago only managed after storms, when the city held its breath and pretended to be innocent. "What happens now?" Marcus asked, but his voice carried the careful distance of a soldier who understood when operations concluded and normal life resumed. "Now we wait for the lawyers to sort through 30 years of federal crimes." Vinny opened the desk drawer and pulled out a bottle of Irish whiskey Maria had given him for their 20th anniversary, saved for a special occasion that had never seemed to arrive. "Now we see if the Justice Department has more integrity than the men who've been running their shadow operations." He poured 2 glasses, the amber liquid catching the lamplight like liquid gold. Outside, the city continued its indifferent rhythm, unaware that a 3-decade conspiracy had just collapsed in a South Side security office that smelled of coffee and regret. Marcus accepted the whiskey but didn't drink. "Your granddaughter, she really didn't know any of this?" "Sarah knew her grandfather carried ghosts, but I made sure she never learned their names." Vinny lifted the glass to his lips and tasted freedom for the first time in 30 years. Geneva isn't just about protecting her from retaliation. It's about letting her build a life that isn't defined by choices I made before she was born. The whiskey burned, but it was clean fire. Nothing like the acid that had eaten at his stomach every Christmas morning when the weight of Phyllis Giancana's murder settled on him like a familiar coat. He thought of all the holidays ruined by guilt, all the family gatherings shadowed by the knowledge that his silence had cost lives. All the time Sarah had asked why Grandpa looked so sad, and he'd blamed arthritis, or old war wounds, or anything except the truth that would have destroyed her faith in justice. "Maria knew, didn't she?" Marcus said. "She knew what you were carrying." "Maria knew everything I couldn't bring myself to tell her." Vinny touched the photograph again, remembering his wife's hands sorting through construction documents in their kitchen, her methodical mind cataloging connections that escaped federal investigators. "She spent our entire marriage building a case against the people who used us, building it quietly, carefully, like she did everything else." The phone rang, but this time Vinny let it go to the machine. His recorded voice filled the office with professional courtesy, offering to return calls during normal business hours. Normal hours for a normal business, as if private security consulting didn't occasionally involve dismantling government conspiracies in the middle of winter nights. Marcus finished his whiskey and set the glass down with military precision. "I should go. My report to the Congressional Committee is due tomorrow, and I suspect it's going to be considerably longer than anticipated." "Marcus." Vinny's voice stopped the younger man at the door. "When you write that report, remember that the victims had names. Phyllis MacGuire Giancana, Anthony Scarpelli, Vincent DeLuca, Michael Romano, Thomas Castellano. People with families who still don't know why their loved ones died. I'll remember." After Marcus left, Vinny sat alone with Maria's ghost and the cassette recorder that contained enough evidence to topple careers and trigger congressional investigations. He thought about the cultured voice on the phone, probably sitting in some federal building trying to calculate damage control, wondering how a retired cop had outmaneuvered an operation 30 years in the making. The answer was simpler than they'd ever understand. Maria had taught him that patience could be its own form of warfare, that documentation was more powerful than intimidation, and that the truth had weight that eventually pulled down even the most carefully constructed lies. He picked up the phone and dialed a number he'd memorized but never called, the direct line to a Washington Post reporter who specialized in federal misconduct stories. When she answered, her voice sharp with the alertness of someone accustomed to late-night sources, Vinny smiled. "Miss Rodriguez? My name is Vincent Torino. I have a story for you about the Kennedy assassination files, but it's not the story anyone expects." As he talked, laying out the framework of murder and cover-up and federal complicity, Vinny felt the last weight lift from his shoulders. Outside, Chicago slept under fresh snow that would be dirty slush by morning, but for now the city looked clean and full of possibility. Maria's photograph smiled at him from the desk, her expression holding the same satisfaction she'd worn whenever she balanced their household budget. or solved one of Sarah's teenage crises through careful planning and stubborn love. She'd known this day would come, had prepared for it with the same methodical precision she'd brought to everything else. Vinny finished his story to the reporter and hung up, finally understanding why his wife had looked so peaceful in her hospital bed during those final days. She'd known her work was complete, that justice delayed wasn't always justice denied. The truth would surface now, carried by voices stronger than his own. The dead would be mourned properly, the guilty would face consequences, and somewhere in Geneva, Sarah would build a career untainted by the sins of previous generations. For the first time in 30 years, Vincent Torino slept without ghosts.